Hello there, welcome to ITV News Meridian.
Tonight's headlines in the southeast. Conflicting evidence from psychiatrists at the trial of the teenager accused of murdering his grandmother. Brighton restaurant owner Sue Addis.
Trapped in a controlling and abusive relationship, the ITV weather presenter speaking out about her experience and the signs to look for.
Also this Thursday, a Cold War warrior turns 60. Celebrations aboard HMS Ocelot at Chatham Historic Dockyard.
And I'm in the South Downs doing my bit to help our region's bees and butterflies. Find out how you can do the same.
Good evening. Expert witnesses called by prosecution and defence barristers have given conflicting evidence at the trial of Pietro Addis, who's accused of murdering his grandmother, Brighton restaurant owner Sue Addis.
The defence say the teenager was suffering from paranoid psychosis when he stabbed his grandmother 17 times. The prosecution say there was no evidence of him experiencing a psychotic episode. Andy Dickinson is at Lewis Crown Court with more. Andy.
Yes, this court has heard from two psychologists today giving contrasting evidence, one for the defence, the second for the prosecution. The first has told the court that Pietro Addis, who stabbed his grandmother to death, was in a delusional state, suffering paranoia and in the midst of a psychotic episode. He believed she wanted to kill him. The 19-year-old is accused of murdering restaurant owner Sue Addis at her home in Brighton on the 7th of January last year. He admits killing her but denies murder on the grounds of diminished responsibility. Dr. Peter Mish interviewed the teenager in the weeks after he stabbed Mrs. Addis 17 times in the bath. Asked why he killed her, Mr. Addis, then 17, first told him he didn't have an explanation, but in subsequent meetings he told the psychiatrist he remembered stabbing her because I thought she wanted to kill me. She was holding knives and kept staring at me. She wanted to do me harm. The bathroom door was open. She left the knives and I took them. Under cross-examination, Dr. Mish agreed that there was no corroborating evidence that Sue Addis was trying to do the boy harm. The psychiatrist momentarily broke down himself while giving evidence. He described the killing as extreme, indescribable violence and that Mr. Addis had tipped into acute and transient psychosis. But Dr. Duncan Harding, appearing for the prosecution, said there was no evidence of Mr. Addis suffering a psychotic episode in the 999 call he made to police on the night of the killing, nor in officer body-worn camera footage of his arrest or in a mental health interview that night. Assessing him months later, he decided Mr. Addis was dishonest and exaggerating symptoms, later claiming he had been hearing voices and was being followed by the FBI. He was making things up, the doctor concluded. The trial continues.
Andy and Lewis, thank you.
The family of a man who died after he was struck by a police car in Peacehaven have set up a fundraiser to pay for his funeral. 27-year-old Arthur Holscher-Ermert died at the scene on Saturday night. So far, well-wishers have donated more than £6,000, well over the original target. The Independent Office for Police Conduct is investigating what happened.
People across the region are voting in the local council elections. Seats in Maidstone and Tunbridge Wells are up for grabs, while in Sussex, Crawley and Worthing councils have elections. Voters will also go to the polls at Thurrock and Southend in Essex. The polling stations close at 10 p.m. tonight. Next tonight, is enough being done to prosecute people whose behaviour towards their partners is so controlling it is recognised as a form of domestic abuse?
Well, it's estimated tens of thousands of people are suffering from such abuse, and one of those was ITV weather presenter Ruth Dotsworth.
Hello there. I can hear you, yeah.
For almost a decade, her then-husband threatened and manipulated her, calling her dozens of times a day, checking her phone and even turning up where she worked. In court, he admitted coercive and controlling behaviour and is now in prison.
Well, 14,000 people reported coercive behaviour to police in England and Wales in 2020. But in the same year, only 374 were convicted. For ITV's Tonight programme, Ruth has been investigating and meeting people who've had similar experiences to her own.
In the very early days, we'd only been with each other for maybe 6 months. He started going out a lot, but if I questioned him, he would be very, very, very defensive about it. You know, how dare you ask me? I'm just out with my friends. But I did at the time think that was quite strange, that I wasn't allowed to have a conversation about where you're going.
It is the most dangerous form of domestic abuse that there is. It is the form that is most likely to lead to serious harm and even to homicide. So we have to be able to identify it, and we have to be able to recognise when it's escalating and things are getting more dangerous.
Well, some really powerful stories on tonight's programme. Let's talk to Ruth a bit more. Ruth, we've outlined briefly what happened to you. Just try and give us a bit more of an idea of your situation. What behaviour did you face?
Well, the behaviour that I lived with effectively for almost 20 years, I now know is called coercive and controlling behaviour. It's a form of domestic abuse, but it's very insidious. It's hidden. It's almost, you can't necessarily see it until you look back and you think, well, actually, it's quite obvious. So for me, what started as a little bit of jealousy and possessiveness from him at the beginning of our relationship then sort of became something slightly more, I suppose the word is sinister. And suddenly then you realise that you effectively have become almost a possession, and I went from being his wife to something that really he owned in a sense. And with that came then the isolation from friends, from family, financial isolation, emotional abuse, if you like, and you don't realise it. It sort of creeps up on you, and then it's only when you look back and you realise and you think, oh my gosh, yes, that's exactly the pattern of behaviour that I lived with.
Presumably people at work didn't know there was an issue in your situation. People watching on the telly wouldn't have known, in the same way that, we might miss the signs if somebody that we know is going through something similar.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? You never quite know what is going on in someone's life. To all intents, I lived a very lovely life. I had a lovely home, 2 beautiful children. Everything looked at face value, as if it was a bed of roses. And actually, that couldn't have been further from the truth. And I suppose I didn't want to admit to my friends, to my family, and most of all, I didn't want to admit to myself that things actually weren't right. I didn't want to break my family. I didn't want my children to come from a broken home. And actually, so many people have said to me, why didn't you get out? Why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you ask for help? Well, actually, that's actually the hardest thing to do, and staying is almost easier.
Ruth, there's much more advice I know in the programme tonight, but I just want to ask you quickly in the few seconds we have left, how are you now?
Now I am living a wonderful life. There is life after domestic abuse and coercive controlling behaviour, and that's really what I want to say to anybody in the situation that I was in. If it's happening to you or someone that you know, please, please make the call, ask for help. Life will never be the same again, but it might just save your life. And like myself, you can go on and have a very happy life, and I think we all deserve that.
Ruth, you are doing an incredible job highlighting this issue. A pleasure to talk to you on the programme. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Definitely some good advice there. And you can see Ruth's film in full on the Tonight programme, Controlled by My Partner, The Hidden Abuse, this evening at 8:30 here on ITV. And if you would like support, then please go to our website where there are links to organisations that can help you.
Now, could Kent's environment be at risk because of a decline in insects? Well, that's the worry from conservationists at the charity Bug Life after new research found a staggering drop in the number of flying bugs in the southeast over the last 20 years.
Well, Joe Caution joins us live now from the Kent Wildlife Trust in Maidstone. Joe, how did researchers there carry out this survey?
Well, Sangeeta, they used one of these. It's got a very scientific name, a splatometer. And what they asked volunteers across Kent to do is to hold it up to their number plate and count the number of bugs in the small boxes, take a photo and upload it to the Bugs Matter app. From there, they compile all sorts of data. There were around 400 journeys recorded last year, spanning 9,000 miles. Let's just take a look at some of their findings. So 72% decline in flying insects between 2021 and 2004. Far different from the national picture, which only saw a 60% decline. Well, let's take a look at the numbers in more detail and why this is the case with Lawrence Ball now, who looked at the survey, compiled it, analysed all of the data. Lawrence, thanks ever so much for being with us. Why are these findings so significant?
So insects are critical to maintaining a healthy environment. They're pollinators, decomposers, they're natural pest control. More fundamentally, you can think of them as the links between the complex interactions in a ecosystem. And so if you lose insects, you lose those links and you risk ecosystem collapse.
So what can we do to address this?
So we can do many things. The main thing, the most fundamental thing we need to do is protect habitats, protect nature across large and connected areas. We need to stop using pesticides, and we need as many people as possible to get involved in the Bugs Matter survey so we can really closely monitor trends in insect populations.
Absolutely. Brilliant research that you can get involved with at home, and it's something that we talked about on the programme yesterday. No Mow May, another important way to protect our insects. Back to you, Sangeeta.
Joe, thank you, and we'll be talking to Holly about this issue a little later too. Thank you very much.
Yes, now another issue that's pretty interesting actually, because there are calls for the government to step in to address the growing confidence gap between students from state schools and private schools.
Yes, new research shows that state-educated students in our region expect to be paid 12% less than their privately educated peers. Catherine Walker has our story.
Private school versus state school. There's long been concerns about the difference in grades, access to opportunities and job prospects. But now research shows it's also a gap in confidence that could put students like Abigail at a disadvantage.
You know, people do say your network is a big part of how to get internships and jobs. Networking is becoming more and more important. Sort of in private school, partly to do with smaller class sizes, maybe to do with backgrounds, they sort of have more confidence maybe than state schooled. So if your parents have sort of high-flying jobs, then it might be easier to get an internship.
It's a gap that university student Mia is all too aware of. She went to private school where there was a big focus on soft skills like presenting and public speaking.
I think probably subconsciously it becoming your norm that, you know, the person next to you is just asking a question in front of a room full of however many people. I think if it becomes your norm, then it just becomes part of habit and you don't necessarily realise that it's happening and that is building the confidence.
New figures suggest that state-educated students are struggling to get the same opportunities as their privately educated peers. Only half of state school students manage to get an internship, compared to 2/3 of people from private schools. And when they do get a job, they expect to earn £3,000 less than those with a private education.
I think what was interesting for me in the report is it's built around people's expectations, right? So that's their mindset. So that's the belief that you're not going to get something in comparison to, say, somebody who's grown up in an environment where they've always been encouraged to go for what they want. So those fundamental skills are foundational skills to any successful career. So it is confidence, it is being able to communicate.
It's this skills gap that worries Nihal from the University of Sussex Students' Union.
I think that the government kind of taking it on as their responsibility, that would really help. Because it is, I mean, it seems like, you know, we sometimes take it as like it's affecting those individual students and their outcomes in life. But it's actually affecting like society, like people are not doing as well as they could. They're not able to fulfil their potential.
In a statement, the Department of Education said every student from every walk of life deserves the chance to build a thriving career. We've tasked universities to set ambitious targets on getting students from disadvantaged backgrounds into high-paid, high-skilled jobs. Confidence and contacts can make a huge difference to the job hunt. As Mia and Abigail prepare to graduate, they hope a change in policy will change their prospects. Catherine Walker, ITV News.
Now you're watching ITV News in the Meridian region, still to come on the programme. Combining sculpture and soundscape, the local voices that will be at the core of a striking artwork for Kings Hill in Kent.
And we'll tell you how you can help our pollinators thrive by building your own bee garden.
Well, for plenty more on all of our stories today, you can of course go to our website. itv.com/Meridian is the address. There's the phone number should you wish to get in touch, and those are the details of how you can follow us on Facebook, on Twitter and on Instagram.
Cold War submarine, the Ocelot, is celebrating its 60th birthday at Chatham Historic Dockyard today.
Originally built at the dockyard, the sub returned there after 27 years in service, and even now her covert operations remain covered by the National Secrets Act.
Retired submariner Chris Reynolds, who served aboard, remembers what it was like. He's been talking to Sarah Saunders.
As HMS Ocelot turns 60 years old, former submariner Chris Reynolds welcomed me aboard for a tour. Now with his feet firmly on dry land, he served on the Ocelot before going on later to captain his own sub.
The submarine would go to sea. The crew would very quickly get into a watch routine, normally 6 hours on, 6 hours off. But all the compartments had watchkeepers, obviously, in case of leaks or floods.
It's close quarters living. 6 torpedo tubes, but I gather no showers.
No showers, no. Well, you had a sort of hand shower attached, but nobody ever used it.
Launched in 1962, HMS Ocelot was the last Royal Naval warship built at Chatham Dockyard. It was propelled by diesel-electric engines and had to surface to expel fumes and take on fresh air.
OK, you're now in the control room of the submarine. The beauty of a diesel submarine, when it's not operating the diesels and it's running purely on its batteries, is it's very, very quiet. And it can operate very slowly and very quietly and get in and do the operations that you're being tasked to do. Quite happily, if I could, I'd put a couple of propellers on the back, change all the systems, bring it up to date and take us to sea again. I'd love to go back to seeing one of these. This is the accommodation space.
How many people would be using this sort of space?
Well, it's bunks for 18 people, but this is where the junior sailors would come and they would eat, sleep, watch movies in here. These, I mean, the most favourite bunk, I suppose, is the top bunk, because the middle bunk drops down and it turns into a sofa where everybody can sit at, so you didn't have to wait for them to get off the sofa to go to bed.
In case you're feeling, oh, it's all a bit busy, how awful, plenty of privacy, a tiny curtain.
Yeah, close the curtain.
Just there we go.
Yeah, shut the curtain.
She's actually been here as long as she was in service. So she's a really important vessel for us, an icon of the dockyard. And we're really lucky to be celebrating her 60th anniversary.
Now outfitted to match her last voyages in the 80s, there'll be a birthday party this Saturday with people who built Ocelot and served aboard. Sarah Saunders, ITV News, Chatham.
Fascinating, but don't fancy it. Let's get a check on the ITV Evening News, which is coming up after us. With the details, here's Mary Nightingale.
Coming up on the programme, yet another squeeze on households and businesses. A gloomy forecast from the Bank of England today as they raise interest rates and warn worse is yet to come. The mother of baby P will be released after a government effort to keep her in jail failed. The Queen pulls out of more events due to her mobility issues. And how these jetpacks could get paramedics to the top of a mountain in just a few minutes. Do join me for those stories and more at 6:30.
Mary, thank you. Now a team of artists has begun capturing the sounds and voices of one community in Kent to be used as part of a new set of fruit-themed sculptures.
Well, the recordings will create a soundscape inside 3 giant multicoloured apples due to be built as the centrepiece of a new public park at Kings Hill.
The work hopes to celebrate the area's present-day diversity, along with its proud fruit farming heritage, as Kit Bradshaw has been finding out.
Kent, the Garden of England.
Apples have been associated with this county for generations, and soon that legacy will be at the core of a new art installation. 3 vast sculptures of the fruit will be built in a park in Kings Hill, along with slices of sound from the local community. They're currently being captured at a series of public workshops in the village for artist-in-residence Yinka Ilori's new creation, Slices of Peace.
So essentially what we're trying to do is trying to sort of capture sounds of Kings Hill in Kent, and try and engage the community and the youth and the elderly people to feel a sense of belonging. The artwork is inspired by apples that are grown in Kent, so we want to celebrate that. Also a space where we can meditate and reflect and enjoy the fresh air and the scenery of Kent.
And Yinka felt that this project would be great to have a soundscape for, to kind of bring the voices of the people who live in Kings Hill into the space to make sure they feel that they are part of the process of actually making the work. And it's about joy. It's about unadulterated human joy. And that's what the soundscapes have been about.
The workshops use call and response techniques common in many forms of African music. The sessions are led by Folkestone-based composer Randolph Matthews, with some participants drawn from Kent's universities.
Humming or whistling or just anything is something we do naturally, but in a space that involves other people, you feel in a way kind of vulnerable, but I think that kind of allows us to tap into a side of ourselves that we may not be used to.
Forwards. The finished soundscape will eventually be accessed by smartphones via a scannable QR code attached to the sculptures. They still require planning permission, with construction due to begin later this year. Putting down creative roots for generations of local people to enjoy. Kit Bradshaw, ITV News, Kings Hill.
I feel like we need to go down there when it's done.
Yeah, and you won't ever be bored in that park, will you? There'll all be something to listen to.
Soak up the atmosphere. Now, as we were hearing from Joe earlier on, the number of flying insects in the UK has plummeted by nearly 60% in the last 2 decades alone.
Yes, insects and other invertebrates pollinate most of the world's crops, and without them, life as we know would cease to exist. Holly Green has been finding out how we can each do our bit to support our flying friends.
Flowers. From the smallest snowdrop to the most striking sunflower, bursts of colour that show the changing seasons. And they're not just a pretty sight, they're a hive of activity, a vital part of supporting many insects, and that's essential for all of us.
Pollinators are incredibly important. Without them, most of the world's plant species would fail to set seed and would disappear. And the horrible truth is that we would starve without pollinators. We've made it quite kind of hostile to them. There are very few flowers, particularly in modern farmland. There are lots of pesticides. Climate change is starting to kick in. So they're really in trouble, and it's all down to us, sadly.
So if it's down to us, what can we do to help? Spring flowers are now blooming, with our summer flowers still waiting to take hold. And that means there is still time to get sowing the seeds that will result in a summer spectacular. Great to look at and even better for the environment. But where do you start?
A bee's world is really tiny, and for some it might just be your back garden, that's all they ever see. So doing something on the really small scale can be really beneficial. It can be a really tiny patch of your garden. Letting areas grow wild as well, stop cutting areas of your grass and just let nature take hold. So really small interventions that can make a really big impact.
Surrendering a bit of the garden might seem scary. A flat, pristine lawn has always been seen as the perfect bit of outside space. But now it's time to rethink and look again.
And that's why I'm here at this lovely community garden in the South Downs today, where they have very kindly lent me this little plot of land, which I'm hopefully going to turn into a bee garden made of wildflowers through this summer. So we've been preparing the ground today with the help of the volunteers here. So a very simple process really, just turning over the soil, picking up any big weeds. Then we laid a very thin layer of compost, and that was just to suppress any further weeds that might come through. In fact, wildflowers actually like the soil to be rather infertile, so you don't really want to be putting any fertiliser down particularly. And then it was just a very simple case of spreading the seeds, and hopefully they'll start to take hold, and then of course the very important step of giving them a good water. Now, the mix I've chosen for my bee garden are annuals, so things like poppies, cornflowers. If you wanted to have something that would come back year after year, you might want to choose perennials like oxeye daisies, for example. But this should create something very lovely, very simple, that you can recreate in your own garden. So if you would like to do it yourself, you can have a little look on our website. We have got a little instruction guide on the ITV Meridian weather page. And of course, don't forget to take your photos. Take before and after, and then hopefully some shots of the pollinators that you attract through the course of the summer. Speaking of the summer, have we got any summer-like weather in the forecast? Let's take a look. Here we go.
Feels like home, whatever the weather. Valent Boilers and Heat Pumps sponsors ITV Meridian Weather.
It's all felt quite spring-like, I think, for most of us today, with some nice spells of sunshine, and there's more where this has come from as well. It's not entirely straightforward. We have got a weather front heading our way tomorrow night. That could bring some patchy rain, although of course we do need it for the gardens. In general though, a lot of dry weather, some sunshine around, and temperatures on the rise as well. So the bigger picture shows high pressure just about in charge at the moment, but a cold front heading our way, bringing this risk of some rain tomorrow night. That clears through, and then that high pressure reasserts itself as we push through the weekend and into next week as well. Out there at the moment, some spells of sunshine around, quite quiet. As we head into tonight, we tend to lose a lot of the cloud, and with starry skies overhead, we could well see some mist and fog forming. And temperature-wise, 9 or 10 for towns and cities. They're getting a bit lower out in the countryside, something like 6 or 7, say. So tomorrow morning, any mist and fog will lift and clear, and it's a nice bright start. But we do just find a bit more high-level clouds starting to feed in, and that may well thicken and lower a touch. A southwesterly breeze, always fresher into that south coast, but for many of us, temperatures tomorrow will be that bit higher than today. Our high tide times, we got Brighton there at 2:45 and again at 3:15 into the afternoon. And finally the outlook. Well, as I say, some patchy rain on Friday night, otherwise a lot of dry weather in store. We are seeing UV levels now becoming high and also increasing amounts of grass pollen. You'll notice as well temperatures are on the rise, and actually by this time next week we could start to see values pushing in to the mid to high 20s. It might even start to feel quite, whisper it, summer-like. Have a good evening.
Valent sponsors ITV Meridian Weather.
Yeah, Holly's been hard at work today, yeah, so it'll be interesting to see people's bee gardens coming alive.
Yes.
Well, in just a moment, the ITV Evening News here with Mary Nightingale.
Don't forget, we're going to have coverage on the local elections as the results come in on our website, and of course in our bulletins within Good Morning Britain from 6 o'clock tomorrow morning.
And I'll have your late update just after 10:30 tonight. See you tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.